Essen, you had a question? Yep.
On question 4, I think one of the questions was like, I don't know, I have to go back.
So one of those questions was like select all that apply for. When I looked at it, and I don't know if it was a trick question because I really went over that a bunch of times. Technically, all of those work.
Okay. Well,
right?
let's.
I'm sure there's better ways to.
Let me take a quick look. Let me pull up that question.
Maybe there'd be scenarios where you wouldn't do them, but I feel like okay, when I look at that at its face, I'm like all of those technically are possible.
Let's look at this.
I think one of the questions was a mistake. It says create a static utility class and add a static method to it. Well, in the example, the method isn't static, count total price.
Oh, yeah, this should be keyword static.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
Yeah, that's an error on my part. Which following natives can be used to create? Well, that would be an error. Yep. Actually, I think I put that in there intentionally. I think I might have put that.
For the last one too, then.
I can't remember if I put that. No, I think I put that one in accidentally. I think that's an accident on my part. We have method or function that calculates total cost in order. So that would be a method. We've got a subclass with it. Okay. Well, so there's at least one of these 4 you probably would never want to do. There's at least one of these that is a bad idea.
I guess it'd be the order utility class.
This is fine. We actually do that. That's a pretty common solution.
Would it be the subclass?
Would be the subclass. This is a bad idea. This is a bad idea. Why is that a bad idea?
Because it's not like border doesn't have a calc total price, and you would want it to be. If you're doing that, you would want it to be overridden.
Right. So now, if I set it up this way, yes, order does not have a method, which I asked to add a method to the order class itself, right? I'm not adding it to the order class, and now I can only calculate the total price for special orders.
Right.
I can't do it for any order.
Right, and initially I thought, okay, yeah, I can see why you wouldn't want to do that, but I thought the question was like, can you?
Yeah. Justification-wise, because the fifth one was like.
Which is, so this is why if you looked at the points, 0 points.
Oh, crap.
I assigned this question 0 points and gave this one 10 points so that because I'm going to read your justification and go off of that.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
For sure.
I marked that one as this one's worth 0 points. Explain why you checked the ones that you checked.
Gotcha.
So that's how I'm going to grade that. But yeah, of the ones that are viable here, this one's these both should be static. But this is viable, that's viable, that's viable. The 2 preferred ones are obviously this one and that one. Right, because those are going to create it as it looking like an actual method. This one I don't want to do for sure, and this one's debatable because then I have to say order to utils.calc total price. It gets a bit verbose.
Well, it's kind of dumb too because like you have to pass in an order anyway if you're going to use the static class in that situation. So if you're going to have to pass in an order anyway, you may as well have it in the.
If I do it this way, right? This is fine. Well, again, this is assuming some languages you may need to do this, right? Java doesn't have extension methods. So your options in Java are option here, option A, or option C. You don't have option D, in which case I potentially would choose option C, right? So you got to remember, so A, this is the problem here, that's a subclass. That's not really what I'm trying to get to. I want all orders to be able to calculate the price. So that's the problem there. yes, I might need to have a base version if I want to override it. If I might do something like this, I might say, okay, here's my base version, doesn't have any sort of discount code applied, and maybe have a subclass where I can apply a discount code. And then that incorporates that. So I might do that if I'm dealing something with discount codes and that, but usually that's a bad idea. Usually it's better to do that kind of logic in the base class. This one works just fine. What's the problem there? What could be a downside with that option? That's definitely my preferred option if I can do it.
Isn't that adding it directly to the class?
That's adding it directly to the class. Huh?
If you don't have access to the class, you won't be able to do it.
Correct. If I don't have access to the class, or the class is generated for me, where I can't directly modify the code, then I can't use that option, right? As long as I can directly modify the code, that is great. But if I can't directly modify the code, then I need to use one of the other options, one of the other three. That lets me add it, but not change the original code. Okay? And the only difference here between these two is syntax, right? Again, assuming I put the word static there, the only thing that's different between those two is how I call it, right? Here when I have to reference the order utils class, here I don't have to, right? So this makes the syntax cleaner.
Okay.
Are we done with this one? I just
Yeah,
have a
yeah,
question.
yeah. I was gonna say I had another question too.
When we start with the link queries questions,
That was my.
I was just curious. So, like for the first one, for example, you have to order it by descending and then select, or I guess I use the where, right? And I was wondering, like efficiency wise, does it makes more sense to
So we're looking,
first?
is this the right one?
Yes.
List the products with the price of $5 or more, ordered by descending as a list.
Does it make more sense to sort first and then grab the products that specify that meet the specifications, or does it make sense to grab the specified products and then sort those?
So that answer is actually a little bit deep. So here's the thing. So if I'm working with, so in theory, if I'm gonna order them first or filter them first, does it change the result? Does it change the result of what I get out if I filter them or order them first?
No.
Okay, sometimes that order matters, right? Sometimes those orders may matter. This is a case where it doesn't, the order of the operations doesn't matter, okay? Order of the operations doesn't matter for the correct answer, okay? The answer is it depends, okay? So if I say I've got 1 million orders, and most of those are $5 or more, it's going to be faster. It doesn't necessarily matter. Sorry, let me go the other way. If I've got 1 million orders, most of them are less than 5. Most of them are less than 5. So I'm only maybe getting 10 results out, right? I'm only getting 10 results out. Well, then I want to do the filter first to eliminate all that data, so I'm only sorting a small amount of data.
Right.
Okay. So if I'm expecting a very small percentage of that data to actually be left after the filter, I definitely would want to do the sorting next. If it's the other way around, it's likely for the sorting first to be better. Because one of the things that happens, there's something called, what's it called? Branch prediction, that's what I'm thinking of. So there's something called branch prediction down at the processor level, which makes a guess as to which way you're going to go based on the way you've gone in the past. So if you sort it first, well, that will mean you've separated it into 2 chunks, where here's all the data I want to keep, and here's all the data I want to throw away. So because of that, if you have it 50-50 or somewhere in there where you think that there's kind of a mix of ones that are over 5 or less than 5, it's going to be more efficient to sort it first. Okay? Now, one very important thing to know. When I'm running these directly against a list or an array, something I have in memory, okay, it will run them in the order I tell it to do. It will run them in the order I call the methods. Okay? However, once I run this against a database, it will not run them necessarily in the same order I tell it to do it. Once I start plugging this against the database is actually going to decide. So I'll tell it I want to do A, B, and C, and the database will actually figure out what order to do A, B, and C in. So when we're actually doing this against the database, it doesn't actually matter what order I tell it in, because the database is going to decide to do it in whatever way it thinks is most efficient. Does that make sense? Because what happens is when we run against the database, it's going to generate something we call SQL, and then run that SQL query. And then that SQL query, well, it has to be the individual parts that I told it to do it, well, per the SQL language, have to be in a particular order. So it's going to be in that particular order, regardless of how I call the methods, and the database is going to figure out. Does that make sense? So once we go to the database, it doesn't generally matter all that much.
Okay.
Because we're generally going to get the same SQL, regardless of what order I call them in. Not always, but most of the time. So whether you do where or order by, first or second, I don't care for this particular case. And you may or may not see performance differences. It's hard to know until you put it against real data.
Mm-hmm.
Any other you had another question on this?
Yeah, it's like those linking extension methods. When you is it always going to be this? I guess kind of what he asked. Like in terms of the answer for the homework, is there other alternatives? Like is everyone's answer going to be the exact same?
And so the way I've set all of these up, right? The way I've set all of these up, I can say these options are automatically correct, so I'll automatically grade those as correct.
Right.
If it's anything else, then I manually grade it.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. For sure.
So if it's not exactly like I'm expecting this answer, if it's anything else, then I'll just have to go manually and grade it and look at it.
And then
So.
there's also questions which I didn't see in the
So
book.
like that case of which order should you do, the where or the select?
Right.
I'm just going to grade that manually.
Right. Okay. And so I think it's the earlier questions where it's like turn this either lambda expression into a method.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that to me, I didn't see that anywhere in the book, so I wasn't exactly sure.
Yeah, so sometimes that may be something that, the book doesn't talk too much about lambdas. It kind of expects you already know what a delegate is.
Right.
It expects you kind of have some familiarity with lambdas. Sometimes you have to go back and look on the online and find those resources. Mm-hmm. So let's say I have a lambda. Actually, let me just use that one that I have, one of the ones I have over there. If I have this lambda here, right? That's shorthand for a function.
Right.
Right? So let's say I say var f. We're going to save that in a variable called f. Okay. Well, I could kind of write this as a method. Actually, my access modifier doesn't matter so much. I'm just going to leave it off. So let's just assume for a moment that x is an int. So I've got this returns an int. I'm going to call this method f. And I'm going to say that it takes in an integer x. And it returns x plus 5.
Okay, so yeah, okay, that makes sense. And that's kind of what I was
Right.
assuming.
These things are basically equivalent.
Right. That's how I was assuming that they translated. So okay, that makes sense.
Right. Those things are basically equivalent. Anybody got a question on that translation? Now, it is important to understand that translation because sometimes you'll get into a case where you need to write a lambda that is more complex on the right side.
Right.
If I just like write it like this, all I can return is an expression. But sometimes you may find that you need to do something more complex on the right-hand side, in which case you kind of write the right-hand side just like I would write it here.
Right. Yeah.
So the other way to write this lambda, I could say f is equal to x arrow. That first part stays the same,
Right.
but now I can say curly brace, and I could say if x is greater than 3, then return x plus 5, else right. I might run into something like that. That I can do as a ternary.
Right.
So that's not necessarily the case I would do that as, but you can see where
Yeah, I understand.
that can happen.
Right.
You can easily get into the case where the right-hand side is more complex, where you can't just write it in one line, in which case you're going to use curly braces and then have to understand that, hey, this is behaving like a method, right? It's just like you would write a method where you need a return statement to say what you're returning.
Right. Okay.
But if you find questions, things like that are not in the book, it's because I'm asking you to go do some research online and make sure you get up to speed with those things. So everything may or may not be in the book, but everything, if it's not in the book, it should be online. So link extension methods. Was there any other further questions on link there? Okay. Yeah, I haven't had a chance to grade those yet, but I'll go through those and look at those and see what people came up with.
Is there any way I can get a late grade on this? I suppose.
Yes, I can reopen it. Let me go do that quickly. Okay. All right, so what we want to talk about today is going to be chapter 5, and the main part in this chapter 5 is we want to talk about how do we create a layout file. The big benefit of using these layout files is right now we're duplicating a lot of code in all of our views, and that's going to enable us to take all of that duplicated code, move it into another file, so we don't have to rewrite it every time, and it's also going to mean that our entire website has a cohesive style because we're using that standard formatting. So that's going to make a lot of things easier. It's something we absolutely need to build a website with more than one page. Okay. So in that, we want to delve a little bit more into Razr syntax. We have kind of seen there's a lowercase model, there's an uppercase model. They're not quite the same. You'll see the using directive. We've seen that once before at least. We'll look at, again, at incorporating data using Razr syntax. We'll and then we'll look at this layout. We'll also look at the view start file, which also kind of dovetails into the layout. Okay. So jumping in here, so preparing the example project. So I'm going to kind of code along with what he's doing here in chapter 5. So the first thing I want to do is create that project. What is he calling the project? Looks like he's just calling it Razr. Okay. So I'm going to go over to Visual Studio. I'm going to say create a new project, and we're going to call this Razr. Create that under my repository, desktop. MVC. All good. So the first thing I want to do here is I'm going to create a product class. Go to code, class, product. It's going to be our model. Paste in the code from the book. Okay, so we have a basic model class there with some data. Okay, next thing I want is a controller, so I'm going to go create my home controller. Add the controller. Home. Add a product. Use that models namespace. Edit, advanced, format document. Okay.
You said this is chapter 5?
This is chapter 5. I'm looking at page 96 right now. So just laying the groundwork for the example. Okay, so I've got a model, I've got a controller. I'm going to go ahead and add a view. So this will be my index view. Right now, I'm not going to check this box. By the end of this, we'll be checking that box by default, because we'll actually be using a layout file. Okay. So there's what we're familiar with. I'm going to add to the top that my model is a product. And now I want to start displaying some data. Yes?
Could you maybe show the solution explorer?
I've got my product class, my home controller, I've got my index. And page 98, by the way, in the book. So if you're following along with the book, I'm just directly following along with the instructions in the book at the moment.
Can we have this when you're done?
Yeah. Yeah, you can definitely.
Is this in that big repository that
Huh?
you have?
Yeah, I mean the finished thing is already there. So yeah, if you follow through, that's already I've already got that up on GitHub, the finished project. So okay, so we are just going to display the model name again. So here I've created a product in the controller, and then I'm just passing that through as the model. So let's go run that, just see that that works. Okay, I've got kayak. Okay, so one of the things that you should note, you want to make note of here, is looking in the controller. Notice here at the top, I've got model, right? I've got the keyword model. It's at model. This is also keyword. This is also at model, right? Remember, so there's a difference there, right? One's got lowercase, one's got uppercase. This is what up here is what we call that directive, the model directive. It tells Visual Studio, or it tells MVC specifically what we call the Razr view engine to use that class as the model. Okay, but if I use uppercase, that will be, hey, I want to access some field, some property, some data, and display it to the user, right? One of the things to be forewarned there, if you're typing in model and getting the IntelliSense, generally speaking, if I start typing at model or at lowercase model, sometimes it will suggest, and this has gotten newer I think in 2019, but it used to be, especially using 2017, if I typed in lowercase model, it would try to change it to the uppercase model. So just be forewarned of it.
What did you say uppercase is for again?
So this is saying, hey, I want to actually look at the data. I actually want to see some data from my model, right? I want to show some output to the user, kind of thing. So this is saying I want to use this model. This is saying I want to show data. That's just, it is one of those things that trip people up early on in the process. Once you kind of have used it for a bit, you start to get used to, oh, okay, this is what I have to do. Lowercase here, uppercase there. Now, one nice thing you'll see with the IntelliSense as I'm kind of typing here, so I did model dot that, you'll see that it automatically starts suggesting, now that because it knows what model class I'm using, it's able to go ahead and just suggest. Say, oh, well, okay, so you're using that. Let me give you the methods and properties that are available from that class. Great. So I can see that from that dropdown. I can also say, let's say I want to throw something in there that's not valid. It gives me a red underline to say, hey, something's not quite right. Now, fair forewarning. Fair forewarning, this is a red underline. Okay? Usually if I have a red underline somewhere in my code, it's going to stop me from running the application, right? Usually that's the case. Okay? And if I have an error like this in my controller, or I have it in my model, that is going to be the case. It will stop me from running. However, errors like this that you have in your views, they don't actually get figured out until you run it. So I can still build the application, run it. I could even push this out to the internet. I won't see this error until I actually go load the page up in the browser. Just fair forewarning, those views are not compiled when you build the application. So you do have to go test it. And it's one thing to watch if you ever remove something from the model or you change the name of something in the model, it may not tell you that there's a problem until it's in users' hands. So definitely if you're making changes to the model, you have to be pretty thorough about checking the views. And sometimes that unfortunately means opening the views. Now, I think that there is an option. It used to be that there was an option that you could go into the web config and actually have it tell it to compile the views. Unfortunately, I think it's actually the project itself that you could go and change it. Unfortunately, there's not a checkbox in Visual Studio to tell it to go compile the views before you run it. As far as I know, but there is a setting that's kind of hidden to do that. So let's go back to name. So we're all good here. Next. So one note on here, we've kind of seen this already. This at curly brace, close curly brace, that's what we call a Razr code block. Once I start that, and between the opening curly brace and the ending curly brace, I can stick any sort of C# code that I want in there. Anything that's C# is valid. Okay. So, one thing, now that we've kind of got the basic application set up, what I want to now add is our actual layout page. So to add that layout page, I'm going to right-click on Views. Remember when I normally when I create a new view, where do I right-click? I'm going to right-click on the folder for the controller, right? So Home or MPG Calc or Temp Converter. However, when I'm adding the layout file, I want to make sure I right-click on Views. I don't want to put it into a controller folder because that layout's going to be used by all of my views. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that I right-click on Views and say Add. I'm going to say Add New Item. If I go under, where do you have this? Okay, so this is under Web and MVC. You'll see that there's a few different options. So here's Create a New View. What I want to do is create a new layout page. See that? Create a new layout page. The default name it gives here is what? Layout page 1. Don't take that default. That's not what you want to call the file. What you want to call the file is _layout.cshtml. Generally speaking, the convention is that any file that is used by more than one controller should start with an underscore. If it's used by more than one controller, it should start with an underscore. If it's used by only one controller, then it should be in that controller's file, in that controller's folder, and not have an underscore. Okay, that underscore means that this is a file that is shared. Okay, so underscore layout is what I'm going to call that. The book does call that underscore basic layout. I'm going to go ahead and call it underscore layout because that's what we will be using. That's what we will be calling it in the future. Technically, you can use whatever name you want, but the name we want to prefer is underscore layout. Okay. So if I look at the Solution Explorer, you can see where that is now. So it's not under the home folder, it's just directly under the views folder. Okay. Now let's look at the layout file that it generated. Out of the box, it looks just like a view file, right? There's very little difference between this and the view file I created a minute ago, right? See that? So it's just Razr HTML syntax you're familiar with. Okay. Now the magic of a layout file is these two pieces. So the first part is this viewbag.title. That's generally what we're going to use. We put that in here to say to allow the views to set the title for each page, because I don't want the title for all the pages on my website to be the same, especially for SEO purposes. I want each page to be able to set the title as something different. Okay, so we're going to use viewbag.title to accomplish that. The next thing you'll see is this line of code here, @renderBody. Okay, @renderBody. This is what sets a layout apart from a view. Okay, this @renderBody says put the content of the view here. So all the stuff that I want to have be the same for all the website, whether it be my nav bar, my header, my footer, all that stuff I'm going to put in here. And then the stuff that's specific to that page, I'm going to put in the view This is where I'm rendering the view. Okay. If you don't put the render body there, your view won't actually show up. You'll just get the stuff that's here. Right? So you want to make sure that you include that one all-important line. Now, usually to be Bootstrap sort of compliant, and with latest HTML syntax semantics, I'm going to set this up like so. Typically. So I'm typically going to have that tag that wraps render body be the main tag, because that's where the main content of the page is. And I'm typically going to go ahead and apply container on there, because that's going to make it easier. That way I don't have to write container in every single view. Okay, so that's an important part that I'm going to do to set those up. Okay, now if I run the application right now, still same thing, but my layout hasn't actually been applied. Let's just check that. I'm going to go ahead and add a header here.
So anything that you put in this will appear on every page?
Yeah.
It uses the layout.
Yeah.
So this layout is going to, yes, this is going to be stuff that's applied for every page on our website. That's the goal.
So just to clarify, the render body renders
a view. We'll get to that in a
the
second.
view of, like the view that's using the layout,
Yes, the view that's using the layout.
and that's going to be different on each page.
Right.
Potentially.
Yeah, this is the part that's going to change on every page.
Okay.
We're
So
substituting the view right here.
So like above that main class container render body, I'll have my nav bar, so
Yeah.
that's consistent on each page.
Right.
But the render, okay.
So here I'm going to add just layout applied so we can see. You'll see right now I'm not actually applying that layout. See? I'm not actually getting the layout that I created. In fact, actually, let me pull in the code that we have here, because I just saw they've got some more stuff. So the book example looks a bit like that. So what it's saying, create a header, product information, show the view, and then at the end we've got an H2 that says visit Apress. So this is kind of what they put in the layout. Okay, we've applied a little bit of styling, so everything that's in the view is going to get some padding. We're going to have a little border. We're going to have font size 20 point. So again, right now that's not applied. Right, I have the layout created, but it's not actually being used yet. Okay. So in order to actually apply that layout, I need to go back to the index file and I need to make some changes. Right now, it's generating all the HTML itself, right? We only want this view to generate the HTML that is for this page, right? So I'm going to cut out a bunch of code. That's all the content for that page. It's just this. Product name, model name. That's all I actually want to be in my view, because that's all that's going to be different. Okay? Now, here's where I need to change. It says, if I say layout null, I say, I don't want to use a layout at all. I'm going to do all the HTML myself, right? Just like we were just doing. What I want to do is say which layout to use. So I'm going to say tilde use / layout .cs HTML. Okay. So this one line here is going to say go use that layout file that we just created. Okay. Now remember, when I set up this layout, I also wanted to have ViewBag title contain the title for that page, right? Right now I've not set that property at all. So I need to go back here and add that in as well. So I'm going to say viewbag.title is equal to product name. So that's going to be the title of the page. It's going to be on the tab.
What happens if you don't put the title in there?
Well, let's try it. I haven't specified a title, so it's using the path of the file. See that? If I go actually and look at the view page source, you see that's what the actual HTML. If it's not there, you just end up with empty. Nothing there. And the browser says, okay, well I need to put something here, so let's just use the URL, which is not terribly user-friendly. But you can see now that I've got that layout applied, right? So this part right here in the box, that's what's in the view. Everything else is in the layout, right? So that allows me to have a lot less code in my views.
I was gonna interrupt real quick.
Yep.
Hey, just real quick, I just throw this out there, not related to your class, but if you are looking for a portfolio building activity, I have a website, I have a client who wants just maintenance done on their site. So kind of maintaining a website for an organization that I'm affiliated with. So not now, later, pull me aside, let me know if you're interested. It'd be something to add to your portfolio, could help you out.
Okay.
If you want or need that. So, yeah.
Yep. So you can see what I put in ViewBag title. It's showing up here now. And the layout that I've used is being applied. Again, this part is this part is the view. Everything outside there is the layout. Scott, did you have a question?
No.
Okay.
Can you just go back to the code on the layout page?
So let's go back to the code on the layout. Okay.
So the render body gets, like everything that's in that render body
Everything in that render body
gets the styles.
is this.
Okay.
See, that's what gets, render body gets replaced by this code here.
How does it know which file? I don't understand.
So we started in our home controller, right? We're in the index action, right? Index action tells it what view to use, right? I haven't specified a view here, so what's the default view? Index. So it's actually going to go to index first, and index says the layout I want to use is that file. So it actually reads the view first and the layout next. Right? It actually is going to generate figure out all the HTML that the view generates and then plop that into the layout. That makes sense? It's not maybe the way you would think of it, where it does the outer part first and then the inner part. It actually does the inner part and then the outer part.
You can also style
Mhm.
the regular, like the product name. You could also
Yeah,
style that however
easily
you
enough.
want.
If I wanted to just put in whatever styling I want, so let's say this is a div, and I want to make this red or blue or whatever color I want. Style it there. Refresh. I can do any styling I want.
So cool.
Right? And recognize, so my head section's over here. I want to put in a CSS file. Well, I just put it in here. If I want to link in Bootstrap, I just add it to this layout file. I don't have to add it now to every single view. I just add it to the layout file and I'm done. Now it's available on every view on the website. If I have a common main CSS file I want to put in there, use it for every page, again, put it on the layout, we're done.
Just kind of like inheriting HTML.
It feels like.
Maybe a little bit. Maybe a little bit. Any questions with that so far?
Did you put this on GitHub yet, or?
Yeah, the finished process, if you look under chapter 5, that Pro MVC, I can show it when we're done. I can show you how to get to it when we're done, but this thing's already on GitHub. So I want to go pull that. Now, I do want to clean this up a little bit. Okay? Right now, every view I create, I still have to specify which layout to use. Okay? Every view I create, I'm still going to have to tell it which layout should that use. Right? I still have to put that line in there. Well, if for whatever reason they need to move that layout to another folder or change it or rename it, that's going to mean that I have to go through every view and update that one line, right? Not great. Okay? Or if I have, there's enough code to write there that I could easily goof it up and put in it wrong. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add another file. So I'm going to add this again to the views folder, not to a particular controller folder. I'm just going to create this actually as a view for the moment. I'm actually going to gut everything that's there. So I'm going to call this view start _view start. You'll see that's in the same place as the layout file. In there, I'm going to add this line. That's all I have in view start. View start says layout is this.
So what is that called?
Huh?
Like, what is this called?
So this is called the view start file. So
you always have,
it's
always be called view start?
Yes, it always has to be called specifically _view start, and it has to be in the root. Because what happens is Razr will automatically look for a file with this name, and it will take all of the code that's in this view start file, add it at the beginning of all your views. So this line of code is now at the beginning of every single one of my views. Okay? Which means that now that I've got that file, I can just cut out that line of code. I don't have to include that in any of my views. So all I have up at the top is I'm setting the title. That's it. Setting the title, view start takes care of setting the default layout for the entire website.
So will you always only have one layout then?
Technically, yeah. You can have more than one layout. If you have more than one layout, then you do have to go into the view and say this view is using this layout. But typically, we're going to have the entire website use the same layout. Why might we want that? Why might we want the whole website to have the same layout?
So it all looks the same.
Yeah, uniformity, right? I don't want to have one page look drastically different from another. If I have a nav bar on one page, I probably expect that nav bar to be on all pages. If I have a footer, I want that footer on all pages, right? So typically your entire website is just going to have one view start file, one layout file, and that'll take care of how the website looks. And bringing in Bootstrap, bringing in jQuery, all of those kind of things, bringing in your JavaScript, bringing in your CSS, will move all of that over to the world of the layout. Now, just to prove that this is working on more than just the one page, I'm going to go ahead and add a second page so we can see that it's applied to all of the pages. So going back to Home Controller, I'm going to say, boop, add a method. I'm going to call this name and price. So now I have index and I have name and price. Both of them are just using this product as their view model, as their model. And I'm going to go ahead and add under home, add a new view, name, and price. Okay. Now, let's look at this. So if I don't check this, remember it's generating all of that HTML, including the head, the body, it's setting the layout to null. Okay. Now that I'm using a layout, I want to check that box. I definitely want to check that box and say, yes, I want to use a layout file. Okay. Now, note what it says beneath the box, beneath this input box. Leave F empty if it's set in the Razr view start file, which we have done, right? So we're actually always going to leave this file empty. As far as this class is concerned, we won't put one there. The only time that you would put one there is if you have more than one layout. So if I want this particular view to have a different layout from the rest of my website, that's where I would put I would tell it to use that layout. It would generate the layout file, that property. Whether or not I put the value in here, it's easy enough to change it after, because you just add the layout equals blah. But that's what we're going to do, is we're going to check the box and we're just going to leave it empty, which gives us this. So this is how our views are going to start with from now on. If you create a new view, please do that process and use a layout. Okay. So it's going to go ahead and give us view bag title. I'm going to go ahead and clean this up a little bit, make this a little bit more user friendly. So I'm going to make this name and price, name and price. I'm going to add a paragraph. Oh, I need to add my model up here. Model Razr dot models dot product. The product name is name. Going to format it out like that. So product name is that, price is that. Let's go run that. So now I've got name and price. Looks like this, using the same layout. If I go back to the index page, you can see that. So now I've got two different views using the same layout. Questions so far? Yeah.
If you have a view start, then the website will just know to use it, and you don't have to include it.
Yep. Yep. You don't have to do anything magical other than naming it exactly _view start. If I mess that name up, it won't find it.
Okay.
So if I were to name that name, if I were to call that file _start view.
Okay. So, and you can still have multiple view.
See?
Yeah.
It hasn't found the layout.
Okay, so if you have multiple layout files, then if you name another one, then it doesn't use view start.
Well, it always uses view start. It always puts that up at the top.
Okay.
That's going to be how I specify what the default is.
Okay. So,
So
if you use a different layout, then it won't use view start.
Well, no, you always want to use view start.
Okay.
You always use view start. You just may put in a line into your view to say use this instead.
Okay.
But you're always going to create a view start file that says this is the one I want to use normally, Most of my website, including my home, especially the one for your home page, probably is going to be the one that you use most everywhere. Same thing here. If I leave off the underscore, you see it can't find it. So it is critical that it starts with an underscore. It is critical that it's called uStart, not something else.
It's case sensitive.
I don't believe it's case sensitive. I would really, really recommend you follow the case, but I don't think it is case sensitive. At least most of the time. So, looking at where we're at here, using Razr expressions. So we kind of looked at that. So model name I put in, model price I put in to show those things. If I want to get in additional data, I might put it in the view bag. So I might say view bag, product count, view bag express ship, yada yada. So I can add additional data using view bag and then show that. So here we've got a table, we've got the model name, we've got the price, and we've also pulled in this additional data from view bag. So sometimes you may see things like this where we've got some data from view bag and we've got some data from the model. Does that make sense? Because sometimes we don't want to go change the model to add that additional data. So that would look like this. So I've got these first two items being pulled from the model. That third item is pulled from view bag. Only difference being here view bag dot, model dot.
So is there any reason to not just do model up there?
It may be that I don't want to add that data to the model. So the thing to know, anything that we put in the model now is stored in the database, right? Is going to be stored in the database. So things that I may want the structure in the database to be saved this way, but I may want the way it shows up to the user on the front end to look another way. So that's where I'm going to add those additional pieces of information into view bag so I don't have to change what I'm saving to the database, because I may not want to for good reason. You have a hand up, Evan?
No, we use the, no, I answered my own question, sorry, I didn't
Okay.
keep it up.
Okay. So the other thing, setting attribute values. So far we've put content into our page, but we can also use Razr to set attributes on those tags, which actually is relatively easy, relatively self-explanatory. So here I'm saying data discount equals viewbag.apply discount. Data express equals viewbag.express ship. That should seem pretty obvious. So what it's going to replace between the quotes is whatever thing I put in there. Whatever expression I put in there, I can put in there. Okay?
So they're just using VBAG. They're just using VBAG to, I guess,
Pass additional stuff.
pass additional thing into, okay.
Yeah.
Into those attributes.
Mm-hmm.
So where, like apply discount, so where is the apply discount coming from?
It's coming from the controller. So look at the controller. You see it sets apply discount to false. So you see product count is 1, express ship true, apply discount false, supplier null. So all of this stuff for ViewBag is being set in the controller.
Instead of putting it in the model,
Yeah.
so that it doesn't go to the database.
Right.
But those data attributes, not in the HTML. What were those again? Data.
There's nothing magical about the name.
Data is not. Okay.
They're just applying some additional stuff. Discount. If the convention in HTML, any additional properties that are formally part of the HTML spec, you just start with data dash blah. That's whatever name you want to give it. There's nothing magical about this word discount. That's
So it's
just the
made up.
name they came up with.
Oh, okay. Those are just data.
So what is that div doing right there?
So let's see what this div is doing. So nothing, I don't think this is actually doing anything productive. They're just trying to show what it would look. Because what we want to look at is what does it look like on the HTML site? What does the source code look like when it generates? because it does do some interesting things sometimes. So apply discount, express is express ship, supplier is supplier. We also have down here, this is going to be interesting. So discount, checked is equal to apply discount, express, checked is equal to express ship, supplier is equal to checked equals, or checked equals that, right? So if we were to literally take those values out, again, let's look at what those values were. Apply discount, express ship, and supplier. So false, true, and null. Okay, false, true, and null. There is a little bit of magic happens when you set this check property. The Razr decides to do. Okay, because remember that checked is a Boolean attribute, right? It's either present or not present, right? That's what tells it whether or not the box should be checked. You usually don't see check being checked is equal to this normally, right? When you're writing HTML. So what I want to generate is maybe something a little bit different. So let's look at this. So if I run this, I'm going to look at what the HTML is in the browser. We'll see data discount equal false, data express true, data supplier is empty string, right? So it's gone ahead and figured out true, false, null. That's how it's gone ahead and represented them, okay? However, with the checked property, looks how it's generated it. So for the one that was discount was false, it's completely left off the checked property. For express, which is true, it said checked equals checked. And then for supplier, which was null, it's left off. So when you're working with Boolean attributes, there's some magic that MVC does. So you just got to be aware of that. This is what you want it to do. This is, let me just be clear, this is design. Right? This is what's going to work with any browser you work with. So this is actually what you want it to do. But note that it's a little bit different depending on what kind of attribute you're giving it. So typically it will show up here and just throw the value directly in there. But if it's a Boolean attribute, it's got some smarts to figure out how to send that to the browser. This isn't something I was aware of actually until I read through this chapter. It's like, what? I didn't know that exists. But it is quite helpful. One of those hidden features. So if we look at how that actually looks in the browser, we'll see checkbox, that's not checked. Checkbox, that is checked. That isn't checked. Conditional statements, we've seen a little bit of that already. We already put an if in here. We might also want to go do a switch statement. So here we're saying we'll take the product count. If the product count is 0, we're going to display the text out of stock. If the product count is 1, we're going to say low stock. Otherwise, we're just going to show the product count. So to give the user some kind of indication of how much is left, right?
And this is in the view.
This is in the view, yeah. So we've got a switch statement here in the view. Note that I'm doing a cast here. I'm casting product count to an int. Remember why I need to do that? We talked a little bit about that yesterday.
We talked about for an object.
We talked about, what did I say view bag is? View bag is
Oh, it's
dynamic, right? So we don't know what type. The view has no idea what product count is. It doesn't know what type it is. So I have to tell it it's an integer. Treat it as an integer. Otherwise it's going to throw up its hand and say, you can't put this in a switch statement because I don't know what it is. So I have to tell it's an integer. And then this little thing I have here, @ we have seen that at one point in chapter 1 or 2, I think chapter 2 did go over that briefly. That's just saying, hey, the stuff that's here, don't treat it as C#. Just treat this as raw text. Because otherwise, without the @ colon, it would be trying to read this as code. It would be trying to read out of stock as code. So that's just to tell it, don't treat the stuff on this line as code. We don't need it here because as soon as it sees a tag, a starting tag, it goes ahead and says, oh, this is HTML, I just want to give it to the browser.
Could you do this logic in the model too?
You could, but again, there's a reason I'm doing it here, and that would be because this is presentation logic. Does that make sense? The reason that I'm doing it here is because it's considered presentation logic. It's changing how I display it. The actual data is still just a number. It's just still how many Snuggies do I have on stock? Do I have 0 Snuggies? Do I have 1 Snuggie? Do I have 10 Snuggies? That's all the data I'm storing. I'm just storing the count.
Right.
And the way I'm displaying it to the user, though, is what's changing, right? So whether I'm saying out of stock, low stock, or just showing the number, this stuff is really display logic. It doesn't really have to do with the data. It's just I'm trying to give the user some sort of indication of the stock levels. So it's what we consider presentation logic. I did show an example with this yesterday. Let's say we want to have an array. So here we have an array of products. We want to go use that as our model. To use that as our model, they're putting it in here as Razr models product array. Notice little square brackets at the end saying it's an array. I would recommend doing that as IEnumerable, like we did yesterday. It'll work the same way. So you just say IEnumerable Razr models product is the way I would recommend it. Now, the one upside of doing it this way, there's a length property on an array. There is no length property on IEnumerable. So that's the one upside of doing it that way. You could still use the length method dot count, even if you had IEnumerable here, and that's why I would do that. So you say, okay, if there's any products, we're going to go ahead and loop through them, show them as a table. If there are no products, then we're going to show this instead, no product data. So that comes out as a table, looks like this, assuming we have products. If I didn't have any products, then I would just see no product data. Now, notice here, if I'm generating a table, there's some structural stuff that I have to set up. So remember the table tag, table starts with table, end table. I have to have this table row for the header, for the columns. So it's going to be start with T head, end with T head, table row, table header, table header, table header. So there's where I'm specifying up here is the header, is the column headers. That's not in the loop because I only want one copy of that. If I move that in the loop, I have multiple copies of that header row, right? So I'm putting content out there that I only want to happen once outside the loop. So this I only want once, I only want one ending table body, I only want one ending table tag. But inside here, inside the loop, I'm generating a row for each product. Does that make sense? The stuff you put outside the loop, you'll get it once. The stuff inside the loop, you'll get for each item. So you just kind of have to figure out how often you want that. One thing you may want to do, notice in here there's a few places where I have to write Razr models product. Razr models product. Sometimes I want to reduce duplication of that. Okay. Now, one way I could reduce duplication is just using the word var here. I could just say var p and it would be fine. But if I do need to specify the class out for whatever reason, I can add a using statement to the top of the file. And this is actually what we call this is a using directive. Okay. So this using directive is going to say razor.models. We want to include everything from that everything from that namespace we want to just use freely. I don't want to have to say Razor models for any of my models. That happens pretty normally because you work with models in your view all the time. So
Is that
usually
the namespace?
that's the namespace.
Okay.
Yeah. Razor is the name of the project. Models is the name of the folder. So that's the namespace name. And that means here I can just say product array. Here I can just say product P instead of specifying out the whole name. And that's it. So the main takeaway from chapter 5 is now you've seen how to use a layout file, how to use that view start file. Right? Those are the two most important things to remember. The other things we've seen at some point, for the most part, you may have seen in this week or last, so that should just be a refresher. But that's the big new piece. Now, I noticed when I was looking at the Lab 1B sheet that I'd forgotten to put in something about the layout file. So if you do go look at Lab 1B, you'll see that it's been updated. Experiment with layout. Because what I want you to do is take that experiment project that we've started with the template converter, the MPG calculator, and now will be the roster, which is your other lab for this week. Take that all and convert that over to using a layout. Does that make sense? So there's some details about how I want you to do that through there, but that's to get some experience with that. Your portfolio, because it's only really one page, I'm not asking you to switch that over to a layout right now. That's up to you if you want to make that switch, but I want you to switch the experiment over to using a layout. Any other questions for layouts? Do you think that'll shorten your amount of time that it takes to build things?
Just going to Bootstrap and copying and pasting the CDNs alone.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Every single page.
So you only have to put that,
Yeah.
that's right. Rather than putting the CDN every single page, you put it once into the layout and you're done. You never have to integrate Bootstrap again. Same thing with Font Awesome, same thing with Google Fonts, any other third-party library you want to bring it in, makes that a lot easier.
You mean your main CSS, stuff like that?
Yeah, all that stuff. Because you saw how little stuff I have in, how little I have in my views now. Which is quite helpful, especially with real-world website that might have 100 views, right? I'd hate to have all that code in 100 views.
On the labs it talks about .NET compiler and NuGet.
Yep.
Have we done that?
I did mention that one day. Let me just refresh on how to do that. So you're going to go into your Solution Explorer, right-click on the project, not solution, right-click on the project. We're going to say Manage NuGet Packages.
Right.
Here you'll see there's a few tabs. Browse is to go and install new package. Installed is the ones we've already got installed. You're going to see that there's an Updates tab. You can see this is a brand new project I've created, but this package is already out of date. So I want to go update it. Updating, it's very simple. I just click on it and click update.
Is there a way to just keep it updated?
Unfortunately, no. I wish there was. Now, at least not easily. I know that you can go through and update the templates, that you can modify the templates that Visual Studio uses, and that's what you would have to go do, is update the template for Visual Studio, but that's unfortunately not easy to do. So that's where I would ask you that you just go do it manually that way. Now, given things like that, where you have to go do updates, you have to go do layout, you can see that I would prefer us to keep the number of projects smaller, right? The number of different projects that we create for each lab assignment. So we'll be reusing a lot of these projects as we go on, if that makes sense. So you don't have to redo a lot of these steps. So like that portfolio is something we can continue building on, if that makes sense. Yeah, we will definitely be starting a new project next week, for sure, because we'll be starting on that sports tour. But the focus is to build on, keep improving projects rather than creating new projects every time. Any other questions? Layout files, labs. There is a homework out there that's due tomorrow. Razr Syntax. There's a homework about Chapter 5, so you want to make sure that you complete that. And I'd recommend completing that before moving on to the labs. So that should be a good review of everything in Chapter 5 and what we've talked about today. Any other questions? Tomorrow is just going to be, for the most part, a lab day. I do want to do the first thing tomorrow. I want to review the answers from homework 1C, just to kind of look at what I'm looking for some of those questions, so that it's kind of clear about what level of detail that I'm looking for when I ask for those essay questions, as well as what kind of things, so you can get an idea of what I'm looking for. So we'll do that first tomorrow. And past that, you'll just have a lab day tomorrow. Monday next week, we'll have the written test and the hands-on test. That'll be over the stuff that we've covered up to this point.
So 1 through 5.
Huh?
Chapter 1 through 5.
Chapter 1 through 5. Yeah, I'm actually going to skip over Chapter 6. Chapter 6 talks about dependency injection and unit testing and stuff. Unfortunately, I don't think that's probably a bit more advanced than where we're at the moment, so I'm just going to skip over that. And although Chapter 7 kind of assumes that you've done some of that stuff, fair forewarning, I'm going to build the project in Chapter 7 very different from what's in the book. Is that okay? So we're going to try and get to the end, so we're going to get to the same end result from Chapter 7, but we're going to get there through a different pathway. So we don't have to set up as much stuff as he does.